I hit play and there they were, Brett and Aaron, sitting on my bed with their bodies angled toward each other, talking about my house like I was already gone. No panic showed on either face, and that was the part that hollowed me out. Because guilty people usually flinch. But these two looked settled. Erin tucked one leg under herself. Brett leaned back against my pillows. And when she murmured, "We need to decide soon," he nodded like timing was the only question. I stood in the living room with the remote still in my hand, hearing my own breathing and the soft scrape of Erin's bracelet against my headboard. She said the word house, the way people talk about a storage unit or a listing. Something to clear out. Transfer. Close. And leave behind. Then Brett rubbed his jaw and answered, "I've already refinanced once. I can do it again." And every word landed flat. Practiced. And terrifyingly calm. That was the moment the rapper stopped being the worst thing I had found. Because cheating was one kind of betrayal. But planning my future without me was another. Erin lowered her voice. But not enough. And when she said she did not want this dragged out, she sounded inconvenienced. Not ashamed. Like I was paperwork. Brett looked toward the bedroom door once. Not with fear. Just calculation. Then told her he only needed a few more signatures before everything moved. I did not cry. And I did not storm upstairs. Because the proof on that screen had already done something louder inside me than any screaming could. I watched them sit there on my side of the bed, talking in those low, practical voices, and I knew this had started long before I found gold foil. By the time Brett said, "Once it clears, we list it," I was no longer trying to understand what I was hearing, only how far back it went. 3 days earlier, I came back to Dallas from a work trip, tired from highway rain and airport coffee, expecting the usual stillness of home and Brett waiting inside there. Instead, the house felt wrong in a way I could not name yet. Clean enough on the surface, but carrying a discount store linen scent that was not mine at all. I stood just inside the doorway with my keys in one hand until Brett called from the kitchen. Too fast. Too ready. And something in me tightened without warning there. He had chicken on the stove, and an easy answer waiting for my early return. But he never looked at me long enough to make it feel real. At dinner, he filled every silence with grocery talk, traffic, and a loose story about a broken gate down the block, all of it sounding preloaded in his mouth already. He did not ask much about my trip, did not reach for my hand, did not brush my shoulder, and the absence felt arranged instead of accidental that whole night. Upstairs. The bed stopped me first, because Brett never made it neatly. Yet the blanket was pulled tight, and the pillows sat straight, like hotel furniture after checkout that morning. Then I opened the dresser and saw his clothes folded flat beside mine, not rolled into those uneven little knots he had made for years and never once changed before. I picked up one t-shirt, turned it over, and heard myself whisper, "That is not how Brett leaves anything," because even his laziness used to be consistent to me before. When I bent to plug in my phone, a flash of gold caught under the nightstand, and my stomach dropped before my fingers even reached it that night at all. It was a Trojan wrapper, new enough to shine, and because Brett and I had not used condoms in over a decade, I already knew what it meant right then. I set it on the nightstand, walked downstairs with my face steady, and told him work needed me in Austin next week, watching how quickly relief crossed him for real. The next morning, Brett told me he was heading to the gym before work, and that landed wrong immediately because he had not kept a gym routine in months. I stood at the counter with my coffee, watched him lace certainty into a lie he expected me to accept, and answered, "That's good for you." After he left, I rinsed my mug, picked up my keys, and drove to an electronics store with the wrapper still sitting in my mind like proof. I did not need anything complicated, just a small indoor camera with a clean app and enough clarity to show faces, movement, and whether my bedroom was being used without me there. The guy at the counter started explaining premium features. but I cut him off gently, took the basic model, paid, and walked out before doubt could catch up. Back home, while Brett was gone, I hid it inside an old wooden picture frame on the dresser, one dusty enough to look permanent and ordinary. The angle was not perfect, but it covered the bed, the doorway, and enough of the room to show who entered and how comfortable they felt. I tested the feed on my phone. I watched my own body move grainy across the screen, and decided grainy was fine when what I needed was certainty. Over the next 2 days, I packed my Austin suitcase in plain sight, folded shirts slowly, left the zipper open, and repeated the schedule where Brett could hear it. He never questioned the trip, never asked which office needed me, never offered to drive me, and that silence told me more than concern ever could have. Tuesday morning, he walked me to the door, pressed a quick kiss against my cheek, and reminded me to text when I got there like we were still normal. I loaded my bag into the trunk, drove to the end of the block, then turned away from the highway and checked into a small hotel downtown. The first day, nothing happened, and by the second afternoon I had started to hate myself a little for watching an empty room on my phone. I paced, picked up my keys twice, nearly went home, then froze when a motion alert lit my screen at 2:17 and the bedroom door opened. Erin stepped inside first. Not cautious, not rushed, and when Brett came in behind her a minute later, both of them moved like people arriving somewhere already familiar. At first, they did not touch each other, and somehow that made it worse, because people hiding an affair still look urgent. While these two looked settled, Erin crossed one ankle over the other, glanced toward the hedge outside, and started talking about weekend plans, grocery deliveries, and a contractor someone nearby had recommended. Brett answered easily from my side of the bed, his voice low and unguarded, and I kept waiting for the part that would make this ordinary betrayal feel contained. Instead, Erin let the silence stretch, smoothed her sleeve, and said, "We need to talk about the house," with the tone of someone returning to unfinished business. Brett exhaled through his nose and rubbed at his jaw the way he always did when he was deciding how much truth to admit. I leaned closer to my phone, barely breathing, because the word house did not land like panic or fantasy. It landed like planning. He told her he had already refinanced once and could do it again, and the calm in his voice hit harder than anything physical could have. Erin answered that he had promised Willa would not notice, and hearing my own name in her mouth made my hand tighten around the phone until my knuckles ached. Brett said I was always buried in work, always moving, always trusting the accounts to run the way they always had, and every word fit too neatly to be new. Then Erin said she did not want this dragged out forever, because once the money came through, they could list the place and start clean somewhere else. Brett nodded at that, looked around my bedroom like he was already measuring what stayed and what went, and said he only needed a few more signatures. That was when the room stopped feeling like a hotel room and started feeling like the edge of something cold and permanent. I set the phone down long enough to open every banking app and archived email I had ignored for months. And the numbers came up uglier each minute. There was one refinance trail already deep enough to be real, another attempt forming behind it, and retirement withdrawals small enough to hide until they were not. I found the old authorization form next, saw where its original purpose had been stretched into something else, and knew I was no longer watching an affair. I was watching theft being rehearsed. I went home on Thursday afternoon and answered Brett's question about Austin with one word: productive, because it sounded clean, closed, and gave him nothing he could test. That night, over dinner, I asked how his next week looked, kept my voice even, and when he shrugged, I told him we should have people over Saturday. Then I added Erin's name like an afterthought, watched his fork stop for half a beat above his plate, and knew I had just touched the live wire. I invited Owen and Nina because they were close enough to know us, observant enough to notice a room changing, and ordinary enough to keep the night believable. I invited June last, not as my attorney, just an old friend coming through Dallas. And when she heard my voice, she only asked what time. Saturday came with cool air and a low gray sky, and I set the table the way I always had. Linen napkins, good glasses, the decent bottle of wine. Nothing theatrical anywhere. Erin arrived early carrying a dish and wearing the soft cream cardigan I had given her last December, which made the smile on her face feel uglier than if she had come empty-handed. I took the dish from her, thanked her, stepped aside, and watched her enter my house with the same easy familiarity I had seen on my phone. Brett dressed better than usual that night, which mattered because men do not polish themselves for danger. They do it when they think they are safe. Once Owen and Nina arrived, the room filled with the kind of conversation that lets people relax into themselves without noticing they have done it. Brett talked more, laughed easier, poured wine before anyone asked, and Erin settled into her chair with that calm, neighborly warmth she wore so well. June came in last, hugged me at the door, introduced herself with perfect casual ease, and took her seat like she belonged exactly where I had placed her. Halfway through dinner, I served Erin's dish, took one bite, and let the silence open naturally before I looked at Brett and told him it tasted familiar. He blinked, smiled without understanding, and I continued, almost gently, exactly like what you had last Tuesday, around 17 inches the afternoon. Chuhan stopped at her glass. Owen looked from Brett to Erin, and the air in the room changed so fast it felt like someone had opened a door. Brett tried a short laugh first, the kind people use when they think confusion might still save them, but he was already too late for that. I stood, walked into the living room, picked up the remote, and told everyone before dessert there was something they needed to see. The screen lit up with our bedroom, Erin stepping inside, Brett following behind her, and by the time their voices turned from small talk to the house, nobody at my table looked confused anymore. Nobody spoke for a few seconds after the audio reached the part about refinancing, because once money entered it, the room stopped reading like humiliation and started reading like intent. Owen leaned back hard enough to shift his chair. Nina lowered her fork without looking at her plate, and Erin kept staring at the screen like stillness might save her. Brett tried to stand, then stopped halfway when he realized leaving the table would look exactly like guilt, which by then was already sitting in every face around him. He reached for the easiest angle first, asking how I got that footage and whether I had gone through private accounts. But the panic in his voice made the questions sound thin. I stayed where I was and answered with facts. One refinance already in motion, another attempt behind it, retirement withdrawals, and an old authorization form pushed past its purpose. Erin grabbed her purse before anyone told her to, and that mattered, because innocent people argue. But she moved like someone who recognized the door had closed. That was when June set down her napkin, folded her hands once, and told Brett he could stop performing because she was there as my attorney, not my guest. The words landed clean, and I watched his face change for real then, because being exposed is one thing, but being documented is another. He looked at June, then at me, then back at the frozen image of himself in our bedroom. And for the first time all night, he had nothing ready. Erin left first without finishing her wine, without touching the dish she brought, and without making eye contact with Nina, who had known her long enough to understand exactly what she was watching. Owen muttered, "Jesus," under his breath as the front door closed, and the quiet after that felt more final than any shouting could have. Dinner ended in pieces after that. Chairs moving back, glasses left half full, people gathering coats with that careful slowness people use when they have just seen something irreversible. Once the house cleared, June and I moved fast, pulling copies of statements, saving the footage, preserving dates, and sending everything where it needed to go before Brett could reshape it. The refinance stalled when the paperwork was reviewed properly. The withdrawals stopped helping him the minute they became part of a pattern, and the divorce filing did the rest. By early summer, I kept the house, held the stronger share of what was left, and watched Brett move into a smaller rental while Aaron disappeared from the neighborhood without a single goodbye. The first morning I woke up alone, I noticed the silence before I opened my eyes, because there was no television downstairs, no cabinet door closing, no second rhythm anywhere in the house. I lay there for a minute with the light coming through the blinds, listening for the life I had been bracing against. And when it never came, my chest loosened. It was not joy, not relief, not anything loud enough to perform. Just the unfamiliar steadiness of a room that no longer expected me to ignore what I knew. I got up, made coffee, and carried the mug through a kitchen that finally felt like it belonged to the person moving through it. Nothing dramatic had changed overnight. But Brett's keys were gone, his voice was gone, and the air itself felt less negotiated than it had in years. I stood by the sink, looked out at the yard, and realized the house had not been ruined for me. It had only been crowded by a lie that was finished. A few days later, I dragged the old nightstand to the curb myself, because that was where I had found the wrapper and I did not want to keep reaching past it in memory. Then I replaced the mattress, cleared out what was left of Brett's things, and painted the bedroom a lighter color that did not carry his shape anymore. By the time the new sheets were on the bed, the room did not feel restored. It felt claimed, which was different and better. People asked how I was doing in that careful voice people use when they expect either tears or fake strength. And I gave them the only answer that felt true. I'm okay. I would tell them. And the words sounded plain. But plain was exactly what I had fought to get back. What hurt most was never Aaron. And it was not even Brett sleeping with her. It was hearing him trust my silence more than my mind. One afternoon, rain came through soft and steady, and I stood on the back patio with my coffee watching the water darken the boards beneath my feet. The house stayed quiet behind me. The yard held its shape, and nothing in that moment felt borrowed, negotiated, or temporary anymore. I had not saved a marriage, but I had kept my life. And standing there with the rain just beyond the roofline, I knew that was the larger thing. Thank you for staying with me through this story and holding space for the quiet kind of strength that rebuilds a life after it breaks. If you have ever chosen peace over chaos and found love that felt safe afterward, I hope you keep choosing it.